We've had two 3-part series that are connected to each other. One was baby boomers in the church and what they have done to hurt the church historically in the 20th century and some in the 21st century. And connected to that, and you'll need to go back and listen or view these other episodes, this whole thing of transfer growth. And we've been talking about transfer growth. In the 2 episodes ago, I gave you the definition of transfer growth. It's when people move from one church to another. There are 2 types of transfer growth, those who come from one community to another. And that's usually a good kind of growth, because if you're active in one kind of community, in a church in one kind of community, and you move to another location, it's good to be active there. Then there's transfer growth, where you're just moving from church to church within the community, church hoppers, if you will, or saints who circulate. That's what we're talking about. You are listening or viewing the Church Answers podcast. My name is Thom Rainer. Thanks for being a part of this. Thank you, Steve Cheney. Thank you, Cheney and Associates. You heard that in the bumper. Cheney and Associates, the accounting firm for the church. Wow. 1,100 churches and growing that they serve. That's all that they focus on. It's been just an incredible journey for them to become this focused ministry. And we're loving partnering with them. So let's talk about the whole idea of transfer growth. Again, transfer growth, 2 kinds: moving from one community to another. That's usually healthy, just to find a church home in a new town. And the other is moving from one church to another within the community. As I've said in a previous episode, it might be healthy if there's a church that is heretical, preaching false doctrine, and a church member moves to a church that's preaching and teaching truth. That's good. But let's be honest. Most people who move from one church to another within the community do so because they're not getting things their way. They're not getting the worship music or style the way they want it. They're not getting the ministry that they want. They're not getting the music platform that they want. They don't like the length of the service. They don't like the preaching. In other words, it's a consumerism type of church. And so, or at least a consumerism type of attitude. And so they move from church to church until they get their perceived needs met. Now, the reality of it, no church will ever satisfy them. And as long as it's all about me, myself, and I, they are not going to get their needs met. It may be for just a season. Oh, I'm in a great church. I'm getting to do this and that. I'm getting things my way. And then when you don't, you leave and you start all over again. Here's one of the curses of transfer growth. In the last episode, we talked about the curse of transfer growth being a kind of this hiding of evangelistic or conversion growth. If we're celebrating churches that are growing at the expense of others, we're not asking the question, are these churches truly reaching people with the gospel? Or are they just pulling from other churches? Well, another negativity of transfer growth that we must face forthrightly and honestly is the plight of smaller churches. Within a community, when the negative type of transfer growth takes place, it is people leaving typically the smaller church for a larger church. In the larger church, they have more of the programs, the ministries, the anonymity, the things that a lot of the self-serving church members want. They are leaving the smaller churches. Now, before I start fussing at those who are receiving transfer growth, let me talk to you pastors who are losing people through transfer growth. I just want to be frank with you. Don't lament, even though it hurts. Don't lament how your church is doing because another church is doing better. Don't lament that your church is doing poorly because another church is doing better. I have never been in a community that didn't have a lot of people who weren't in any church. And I think the future is going to be smaller churches. That doesn't mean smaller churches are ready for the future, but I think the future is going to be smaller churches, because this whole large church movement of self-serving, and not all large churches are self-serving, please hear me well, but this whole movement of growth at the expense of other churches, I think the celebrations are about to end. The pandemic really kind of ripped the Band-Aid off of that. And a lot of people who are attending church for the wrong reason said, if I'm attending church for the wrong reason, I'm just not going to attend church. And so there's less and less transfer growth, and there are fewer and fewer people in smaller churches to feed, if you will, the larger churches. In other words, to have moved to the large churches. The median size of a church, the 2020 data, I think is going to be much smaller when we get current data, is 65 in average worship attendance. There's not a whole lot of people left to feed off to the larger churches. And so one of the negative things that have happened with transfer growth is that it has been at the expense of churches that were once mid-size, maybe larger small churches, if I could say that, the upper 20 or 30% of small and very small churches. They have been the churches that have been hurt most by this transfer growth movement because they have been those who lost members to the larger churches. Now, we think this churn is about to play itself out, and people who were transferring from one church to another are now getting to the point to saying, I don't even need church. I can't get my needs met. And well, you shouldn't be at church just for that reason. But we can say this unequivocally. Smaller churches were hurt by larger churches by the movement of members from smaller to larger. Again, is that assigning blame just on the larger churches? Not necessarily. There's plenty of blame to go around. But here is the reality for all churches. I just want to kind of put a bow on all of this. Yes, smaller churches have been hurt by transfer growth. Yes, evangelistic urgency has been diminished by the emphasis on transfer growth. Yes, we have redefined what is success wrongly by by transfer growth. Yes to all of those things. But here is where it all comes down to. Churches that are going to make a difference in their communities, churches that are going to be truly growing in the future, must do so by sharing the gospel and being a part of the Great Commission. That's the future of churches in America and, quite frankly, around the world. That's the New Testament church. We introduced the Hope Initiative at Church Answers as we found some churches that were doing it, and we have tried to replicate it and send that same type of emphasis to other churches. You can see the link in the show notes on the Hope Initiative. Maybe all of the negative things that have taken place because of transfer growth, the wrong emphases, the moving of members from smaller to larger churches, the lack of conversion growth or evangelistic emphasis, maybe there's going to be a good to this bad. Maybe there is going to be light to this darkness. Maybe there's going to be sunshine to this cloud. I could continue the metaphors. And it could be that we're going to get to the point that we have to do evangelism. I would say that tongue in cheek, but still, we have to do evangelism in order for our churches even to stay open. And though our motive may not be right, I like the idea that we're actually going to be reaching people with the gospel. And maybe we'll start having a new fire to reach people through evangelism. Maybe conversion growth will become the growth that we measure. Maybe that will be the path that we take. I'm an obnoxious optimist about the local church. I know churches close. I wrote a book called Autopsy of Deceased Church. I know that somebody one of my staff members years ago, picked up the URL churchmortician.com, and it now forwards to Church Answers. Oh, that's great. I know all those things, but I also know this. There are some churches that are truly alive. The Spirit of God is truly working in them, and they have decided that their future is not transfer growth. Their future is not doing things the way we've always done them. Their future is God's future, and they are going to be all about the Great Commission. If this new move away from transfer growth results in that, we will have many reasons to celebrate. And I pray that your church will be one of those churches that will celebrate as more people become followers of Christ. Thank you, as always, for viewing us on YouTube. Please subscribe to our channel or give us a thumbs up. Thank you for listening on your podcasting app. Hey, give us a rating and a good review if you would there. Get people coming to the Church Answers podcast, because this is a ministry that we provide at no cost to you, because of the generosity of Cheney and Associates. Thank you, as always, for being a part of the Church Answers podcast, where we'll continue to talk about those things that we hope really matters to you, and above all, really matters to God. We'll see you in the next episode.